Hey guys, tonight we are plunging into the stormy world of Viking sailors, where you're gripping the slick railing of a longship, waves crushing over the prow like a bad-tempered sea god. The salt spray stings your face, the wind howls through the hemp ropes, and you're squinting at a horizon that's just gray churn and darker gray clouds. You're far from home. No GPS, no compass, just you, a creaky wooden ship, and a cage of squawking ravens, yep, ravens, who might be your only shot at finding land. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this without the help, because the North Sea doesn't mess around. Tonight, we are unraveling why Viking sailors trusted these feathered navigators to guide them through the fog and fury. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I love knowing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're still on this longship, the deck pitching beneath your boots, and the crew shouting over the wind, their woolen cloaks soaked through. The sail, striped red and white, flaps like a trapped bird, and you clutch a rope to stay upright. Vikings were master seafarers, crossing oceans to raid, trade, and settle, from Norway to Iceland to Greenland, all without modern tools. Historians say their navigation relied on sun, stars, and natural cues, but when clouds hid the sky, they turned to ravens. You glance at a wooden cage lashed to the mast, where two blackbirds huddle, their eyes glinting like polished jet. These aren't pets, they're your lifeline, trained to find land when the seas amaze. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings believed ravens carried messages from the gods, their flight pods whispering divine hints about safe shores. You smirk, imagining a raven texting Odin for directions, but the crew takes it seriously, muttering prayers as they check the cage. Historians still argue whether this was pure pragmatism or tangled with spiritual beliefs. Did ravens just smell land, or were they sacred guides? You lean closer, the bird's feathers ruffling in the gale, and feel a shiver that's not just the cold. The ship rocks, water slushing over your feet, and you notice the helmsman, his beard braided with bone beads, eyeing the ravens like they're his only friends. You stumble to the prow, the wood slick with spray, and scan the horizon. Nothing but waves, each one threatening to swamp you. The crew's hauling ropes, their faces grin, and you realize how much faith they're putting in these birds. You chuckle, thinking of your modern GPS glitching. Imagine explaining recalculating route to these guys. They'd probably toss it overboard and hug a raven. The air smells of salt and wet wool, and you pull your cloak tighter, the damp chill seeping in. You're starting to see why the Vikings trusted these birds. The sea's too vast, too wild, to face alone. You glance back at the cage, one raven cocking its head at you, and wonder what it knows. The ship lurches, and you grip the railing, ready to see what happens when these birds take flight. For now, you let the sea's rhythm and the crew's low chants lull you deeper into this stormy world. You're still swaying on the longship, the seas growl a constant rumble under your boots, when the helmsman bellows something in Old Norse and points to the raven cage. You shuffle closer, the deck slick with spray, and watch as a grizzled sailor, his cloak pinned with a bronze brooch, unlatches the wooden door. A raven hops out, shakes its glossy feathers, and launches from the mast, its wings cutting through the misty air. You lean over the railing, heart thumping, tracking its path as it spirals upward, a black speck against the gray clouds. This is it, the raven's first flight. Your crew's gamble to find land in this endless churn of waves. You smirk, thinking, if this bird flops, We are basically auditioning for Lost at Sea, Viking Edition. Historians confirm that Vikings released ravens to scout for land, a trick recorded in sagas like the tale of Floki Vildrasson, who used birds to find Iceland. The logic was simple. Ravens, unlike seabirds, hate open water and fly straight for the nearest shore. You watch the raven bank left, its course swallowed by the wind, and feel the crew's eyes on it, their breath held. If it circles back, you're nowhere near land. If it vanishes, you've got a heading. You grip the railing, the wood rough under your palms, and marvel at the trust in this feathered GPS. Imagine swapping it for your phone's map app. These guys would laugh at your battery anxiety. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some crews named their ravens, treating them like shipmates with nicknames like Stormwing or Landsniffer. You glance at the sailor, who's muttering to the second raven still in the cage, and wonder if he's whispering its name. It's oddly endearing, like naming your Roomba. Historians still argue whether these names reflected affection or just practical tracking. Did they bond with the birds, or were they all business? You chuckle, picturing a Viking scribbling property of Bjorn on a raven's leg. The bird's still flying, a distant dot now, and you squint, hoping it's got better instincts than your last road trip navigator. The ship rocks, waves slapping the hull, and you notice the crew's tension, hands on axes, eyes on the sky. The air's heavy with salt and the faint musk of wet wool, and you pull your cloak tighter, the chill sneaking through. You think back to that first stormy moment, the cage lashed to the mast, and realize how much rides on this raven's wings. It's not just a bird, it's a lifeline, a feathered compass in a world without landmarks. You joke to yourself, if this works, you're starting a Raven fan club, complete with tiny Viking helmets. The sailor shuts the cage, his face unreadable, and you lean back, the deck creaking under you. The raven's gone from sight now, and you're left wondering, did it find land, or is it just joyriding? You're about to learn more about these birds, maybe even why the Vikings thought they were divine. For now, you let the sea sway and the crew's hushed murmurs lull you deeper into this windswept world. You're still on the longship, the deck tilting as waves batter the hull, and the ravens vanished into the gray, leaving you and the crew staring at an empty sky. The helmsman grunts, returning to his oar, but a wiry sailor with a scar across his cheek beckons you to a corner near the mast. He's got a storyteller's glint in his eye, and as the wind howls, he spins tales of ravens as Odin's feathered guides, divine scouts sent by the Allfather himself. You huddle closer, the spray stinging your face, and listen to myths that make these birds sound like winged oracles. You smirk, thinking, if ravens are texting Odin, I need the data plan. Historians note that Norse mythology revered ravens, especially Odin's pair, Hugin and Munin, who flew across the world to bring him knowledge. Vikings saw their shipboard ravens as echoes of these divine birds, their flights carrying hints of godly wisdom. You glance at the cage, where the second raven pecks at its wooden bars, and feel a twinge of awe. Maybe it's just a bird, but the crew's hushed reverence is contagious. The sailor's voice drops, describing how Odin's ravens could find land even in storms, and you imagine them dodging lightning like feathered superheroes. The ship lurches, and you grab a rope, the hemp rough against your palms, soaking in the story. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings carved raven runes on their ship's prows, believing it summoned Odin's favor for safe voyages. You spot a faint carving on the mast, a jagged symbol half-worn by salt, and chuckle. Imagine pitching that to a modern cruise line. Just add raven graffiti for luck. Historians still argue whether these carvings were spiritual necessities or just morale-boosting decor. Did they really sway the gods? Or just the crew's nerves? You trace the rune with a finger, feeling the wood's grain, and wonder if it's working now, with that first raven still out there. The sailor's tail winds down, his words blending with the sea's roar and the creak of oars. You think back to the stormy start, the raven's first flight soaring from the mast, and see how these myths fuel the crew's trust. It's not just about land, it's about believing something bigger's got your back. You joke to yourself, if Odin's running the show, he deserves a 5-star review for logistics. The air's thick with salt and the faint whiff of fish from a barrel nearby, and you pull your wool cloak tighter, the damp chill seeping in. The crew's quiet now, eyes flicking to the horizon, waiting for the raven's return. You're starting to wonder what keeps these birds going. How do they survive out here? You notice a sailor tossing crumbs into the cage, and your curiosity stirs. For now, you let the ship sway and the myth's lingering magic lull you deeper into this windswept, raven-guided world. You're still swaying on the longship, the Odin myths buzzing in your head like a half-remembered dream, when you notice a burly sailor with a braided beard rummaging in a leather sack. He pulls out a hunk of dried fish, breaks off bits, and tosses them into the raven cage, where the remaining bird snaps them up with a greedy caw. You shuffle closer, the deck creaking under your boots, and join in, flicking crumbs through the wooden bars. The raven's sharp beak darts, and you're struck by how vital this feeding is, keeping these feathered navigators strong for their next flight. You smirk, thinking, if I'm bribing birds for directions, I'm basically a Viking Uber driver. Historians confirm that Viking sailors carefully tended their ravens, feeding them scraps of fish, bread, or meat to ensure they were fit to fly. These birds weren't just tools. Their health could mean the difference between finding land or drifting into oblivion. You toss another crumb, the raven's eyes locking on you like you're its new best friend. The sailor grunts approval, his hands rough from years at sea, and you notice the cage is sturdy, lashed tight against the mast to survive the storms. It's not gourmet dining, but it's enough to keep the bird's wings ready. You imagine trying to explain pet stores to these guys. They'd probably trade their axes for a raven snack pack. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some crews believed feeding ravens scraps from their own meals forged a bond, making the birds more loyal to the ship. You chuckle, picturing a raven signing a Viking loyalty oath with a tiny claw. Is that why this one's staring at you so intently? Historians still argue whether this was practical care or tinged with superstition. Did it just keep the birds alive, or did it tap into some mystic connection? You toss another bit of fish, the smell sharp in the salty air, and decide it's both, calories and a bit of hope, mixed together. The ship pitches, waves slapping the hull, and you steady yourself against a barrel, the wood slick with spray. You think back to the stormy start, the raven's first flight, and the Odin tales, seeing how every step builds the crew's trust in these birds. Feeding them feels like a ritual, a small act of faith in a sea that offers none. You joke to yourself, if this raven could talk, it'd probably demand a raise and a bigger cage. The air's heavy with the tang of fish and wet wool, and you pull your cloak tighter, the chill biting deeper. The crew's busy now, hauling ropes and checking the sail, but you catch their glances at the cage, their hope pinned on this bird. You're starting to wonder how they read its flights. What signs do they look for? You spot the sailor watching the sky, his face taut, and your curiosity grows. For now, you let the ship's rhythm and the raven's soft chorus lull you deeper into this wild, wave-tossed world. You're still on the longship, the tang of dried fish lingering on your fingers as you wipe them on your wool cloak, the raven in its cage now pecking contentedly. The sailor who fed it nudges you, pointing to the sky, and starts explaining how to read a raven's flight. His voice rough but patient, like he's teaching a kid to tie a knot. You lean against the mast, the wood cold and damp, and listen as he describes how a raven's path, straight, circling, or erratic, tells the crew whether land's near or just a cruel rumor. The sea's calmer now, waves lapping instead of crashing, but the gray horizon offers no close, and you're hanging on his every word. You smirk, thinking, if I misread this bird, we are starring in Viking Shipwreck, the sequel. Historians note that Vikings honed their raven-reading skills over generations, using the bird's natural instincts to navigate uncharted waters. A raven flying straight meant land was likely ahead. Circling or returning to the ship signaled open sea. You squint at the sky, imagining that first raven you saw, its wings slicing through the mist, and try to picture its path. Did it arrow forward or loop back? The sailor gestures sharply, mimicking a raven's dive, and you nod, pretending you get it, though it feels like decoding a feathered Morse code. You're starting to grasp why this skill was gold. Without it, you're just guessing in a world where guesses sink ships. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings swore ravens cawed differently when they spotted land, like they were shouting, "Jackpot." You chuckle, imagining the bird belting out a victory squawk, but the sailor's dead serious, claiming he's heard it himself. Is it true, or just wishful thinking? Historians still argue whether these vocal cues were real or just sailors projecting hope onto every call. You listen to the caged raven's low croak, trying to hear a hint of triumph, but it sounds more like it's complaining about the fish. You toss it another crumb, just in case it's got secrets to spill. The ship sways gently, the sail flapping above, and you notice the crew's eyes flicking skyward, still waiting for that first raven's return. You think back to the stormy start, the raven's launch, the Odin myths, and the feeding ritual, seeing how each piece builds their trust in these birds. It's not just about wings, it's about reading nature's signals in a sea that hides them. You joke to yourself, if you could train ravens like this, you'd start a navigation school and charge in gold. The air's crisp, scented with salt and the faint rut of seaweed caught in the ropes, and you pull your cloak tighter, the damp wool heavy. The sailor's lesson wraps up, his hands tracing one last flight path, and you're left wondering what happens when fog rolls in. How do ravens navigate then? You glance at the horizon, now blurring with mist, and your curiosity deepens. For now, you let the ships creak and the raven's soft croaks lull you deeper into this vast, wave-rocked world. You're still on the longship, the sailor's flight-reading lesson echoing in your mind as you squint at the horizon, now swallowed by a thick, clammy fog. The sea's a gray blur, waves muffled to a dull slap, and the crew's voices are hushed, like they're afraid to wake the mist. You grip the railing, the wood slick under your palms, feeling utterly lost. No stars, no sun, just this damp shroud wrapping the ship. The helmsman calls for the raven, and you watch, heart thudding, as a sailor opens the cage, the bird hopping out with a ruffle of feathers. It launches into the fog, a black shadow fading fast, and you're betting everything on its instincts to find land. You smirk, thinking, if this bird gets lost, we are basically playing hide-and-seek with Valhalla. Historians confirm that Vikings relied on ravens even in fog, trusting their keen senses to detect land when human eyes failed. Ravens could supposedly smell or hear coastal cues, waves on rocks, distant gulls, guiding ships through blinding conditions. You strain your ears, catching only the creak of oars and the raven's faint call, but the crew's watching the sky like it's a sacred text. You're amazed at their faith. This bird's your only compass in a world turned to soup. You imagine trying to explain radar to these guys. They'd probably shrug and point to the raven, like, why bother? The fog clings to your cloak, heavy with salt, and you shiver, hoping this bird's as smart as they think. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings believed ravens could see through fog by tapping into Odin's magic, like feathered night vision goggles. You chuckle, picturing the raven with tiny enchanted specks, but the sailor nearby mutters a prayer to Odin. Dead serious. Is it divine sight, or just a bird's sharp nose? Historians still argue whether this was pure mythology or a poetic take on ravens' natural skills. You peer into the mist, the raven long gone, and wonder if Odin's lending a hand. The crew's tense, the hands on ropes, waiting for the bird to return or vanish, and you're starting to feel the weight of this gamble. You lean against the mast, the cage empty now, and think back to the stormy start, the first raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, and the flight reading lesson. This fog's testing every trick, and the raven's your last hope. You joke to yourself, if this works, you're naming your next pet raven Fogbuster and giving it a medal. The air's thick, scented with damp wool and the faint tang of fish from the barrel, and you pull your cloak tighter, the cold seeping deeper. The crew's murmurs blend with the sea's soft churn, a sleepy rhythm that pulls you in. You're starting to wonder what the raven's finding, maybe a whiff of land. You notice a sailor sniffing the air, his face hopeful, and your curiosity stirs. For now, you let the fog's hush and the ship's gentle rock lull you deeper into this misty, raven-led world. You're still adrift in the longship, the fog so thick it's like sailing through a wet blanket, and the crew's eyes are glued to the sky, waiting for the raven you just released. You're clutching the railing, the wood damp and cold, when a faint core cuts through the mist, and the bird swoops back, landing on the mast with a flutter of wet feathers. The helmsman cheers, pointing to a tiny twig in its beak, a sign it's been to land. You sniff the air, catching a whiff of pine and earth, the faint scent of a shore you can't yet say. The raven's brought you hope, and you're starting to believe it's more than just a bird. You smirk, thinking, if this raven's delivering twigs, it's basically the Viking version of FedEx. Historians confirm that ravens often returned with clothes like twigs or feathers, proof they'd found land, helping Vikings adjust their course. This bird's likely caught the scent of a forested coast, its instincts sharper than any human knows. You watch the sailor coax the raven back into its cage, rewarding it with a scrap of fish, and you lean closer, smelling that faint piney tang on its feathers. It's not just a hint, it's a lifeline, pulling you out of the fog's grip. You imagine trying to explain scent tracking to a modern sailor. They'd probably scoff, then check their radar. But here, the raven's nose is king. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings believed ravens carried the scent of land in their feathers, like tiny perfumed messengers from the gods. You chuckle, picturing the raven spritzing itself with eau de coastline before flying back. Is it divine delivery, or just a bird's natural knack? Historians still argue whether this was mythic flair or a poetic take on ravens' keen senses. You sniff again, the pine stronger now, and decide it's both nature and a touch of magic, woven together. The crew's buzzing, adjusting the sail, their faces lit with cautious hope, and you're caught up in their quiet excitement. You settle against a barrel, the fog thinning slightly, revealing patches of gray sea. You think back to the stormy start, the first raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, and the foggy gamble. This twig's a turning point, proof the raven's leading you somewhere real. You joke to yourself, if you make it to shore, you're carving this bird's name on your shield, assuming it's not just cold Bob. The air's damp, scented with salt, pine, and the faint musk of wet wool, and you pull your cloak tighter, the chill easing as hope warns you. The crew's rowing now, following the raven's clue. There was splashing in rhythm. You're starting to wonder what rituals they'll perform to thank this bird. Maybe a little Viking fanfare? You notice a sailor muttering to the cage. He's tone reverent, and your curiosity grows. For now, you let the sea's soft churn and the raven's triumphant call lull you deeper into this misty, land-scented world. You're still on the longship, the piney scent of land lingering in your nose as the fog begins to lift, revealing a choppy sea under a slate-gray sky. The raven's tweak has the crew buzzing, their oars dipping faster, but now they're gathering near the mast, where a wiry sailor with a bone-carved pendant pulls you into a quiet ritual. You kneel on the damp deck, the wood creaking, as he sprinkles salt water from a clay cup over the raven's cage, chanting thanks to Odin for the bird's guidance. The crew murmurs along, their faces sullen, and you join in, mimicking their low tones, feeling like you're part of something ancient. You smirk, thinking, if this is Raven Fan Club initiation, where's my membership rune? Historians note that Vikings often performed rituals to honor their ravens, seeing them as divine emissaries tied to Odin's wisdom. These ceremonies, sometimes involving offerings of water, food, or carved tokens, reinforced the crew's trust in their feathered guides. You watch the sailor place a small wooden raven figurine beside the cage, its edges worn smooth, and feel the weight of their belief. The bird inside caws softly, as if approving, and you're struck by the blend of pragmatism and faith. Thank the bird, thank the god, just keep sailing. You imagine trying to explain this to a modern skeptic. They'd probably roll their eyes and check their weather app. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some crews tossed raven feathers into the sea as offerings, believing it strengthened the bird's bond with the ship. You chuckle, picturing a raven preening and thinking, really? My feathers, as the crew prays. Is it just superstition, or did it boost morale? Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely spiritual or a way to unify the crew under stress. You notice a sailor tucking a black feather into his belt, his expression proud, and decide it's both a morale hack wrapped in myth. You dip your fingers in the salt water, flicking a few drops, and feel oddly connected to this moment. The ship sways, the sail flapping above, and you think back to the stormy start, the first raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, the foggy gamble, and the twig's promise. This ritual's another layer, tying the crew's hope to their winged guide. You joke to yourself, if you could sell this ceremony, you'd call it Raven Appreciation Day and throw in a free feather. The air's crisp, scented with salt, pine, and the faint smoke of a crewman's pipe, and you pull your cloak tighter, the damp wool grounding you. The crew disperses, their chants fading, but their eyes keep flicking to the cage, ready for the next flight. You're starting to wonder how they keep these birds safe. Do they build special cages? You spot a sailor whittling a piece of wood, maybe for the raven, and your curiosity stirs. For now, you let the sea's rhythm and the ritual's quiet hum lull you deeper into this windswept, raven-blessed world. You're still on the longship, the ritual's salt water flakes still damp on your fingers, as the crew settles back to their tasks, the sea now glinting under a thinning fog. A lanky sailor with a leather apron pulls you to a corner of the deck, where he's whittling a piece of oak with a small iron knife, shaping a slatted cage for the raven. You kneel beside him, the wood shavings curling at your feet, and help hold the pieces steady, learning how these pens are built to keep the birds safe through storms. The raven inside the old cage cores, as if critiquing your work, and you're struck by the care put into this craft. You smirk, thinking, if this bird's got a custom condo, I'm jealous of its real estate. Historians confirm that Vikings crafted sturdy wooden cages for their ravens, often using oak or pine, designed to withstand the sea's battering and protect their precious navigators. These pens were lashed to the master deck, with slats for air and a hinged door for easy release. You run your hand along the new cage's frame, feeling the smooth joints, and marvel at the sailor's skill. No nails, just clever notches holding it together. It's not just a box, it's a lifeline, keeping the raven ready for its next flight. You imagine trying to pitch this to a modern pet store. Stormproof Raven Penthouse, Viking approved. They'd think you were nuts. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some sailors carved protective runes into the cages, believing they shielded the birds from evil spirits or rogue waves. You spot a jagged symbol on the old cage, half hidden by wear, and chuckle. Imagine the raven rolling its eyes at the extra bling. Is it just decor, or did it ease the crew's nerves? Historians still argue whether these runes were spiritual necessities or just a craftsman's flourish. Did they guide the bird, or the sailor's hopes? You help the sailor fit a slat, the wood's grain rough under your fingers, and decide it's both art and faith, carved into every line. The ship rocks gently, the sail snapping above, and you think back to the stormy start, the first raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, the foggy gamble, the twig scent, and the ritual's chant. This cage is another pace, a tangible anchor for the crew's trust in their winged guide. You joke to yourself, if you could design a raven cage, you'd add a tiny skylight and call it Feather Palace Deluxe. The air's fresh, scented with pine, salt, and the faint tang of wood shavings, and you pull your cloak tighter, the damp will heavy but warm. The crew's busy now, some mending ropes, others watching the horizon, their faith in the raven unshaken. You're starting to wonder if they tried other animals. Did ravens have competition? You notice a sailor muttering about gulls, and your curiosity sparks. For now, you let the sea's soft creak and the whittling's rhythmic scrape lull you deeper into this wave-tossed, raven-guarded world. You're still on the longship, wood shavings from the raven cage dusting your cloak as you brush them off. The sea now calmer, its waves a soft ripple under a sky streaked with pale light. The sailor crafting the cage nods you toward a grizzled crewman sitting on a barrel, his hands mending a net, who's muttering about navigation tricks beyond ravens. You settle beside him, the deck creaking, and listen as he grumbles about other animals, gulls, whales, even seals, some Vikings tried using to find land, though none matched the raven's neck. His stories spark your curiosity, painting a picture of trial and error on the open sea. You smirk, thinking, if seals were navigators, I'd be booking a ticket to the wrong continent. Historians confirm that while ravens were the go-to for Viking navigation, some crews experimented with other creatures, like observing seabirds or whale migrations, to gauge proximity to land. Gulls, for instance, often stayed near coasts, but their erratic flights were less reliable than a raven's direct path. You imagine a Viking releasing a gull, only to watch it chase a fish instead of land, and grin at the thought. The crewman scoffs, tossing a net knot tight, and insists ravens are unmatched. Their sharp senses and land-loving nature made them the gold standard. You glance at the cage, the raven preening inside, and nod. It's hard to argue with a bird that delivers tweaks. Here's a quirky tidbit. A few sagas mention Vikings following seals, believing their routes led to hidden fishing grounds or shores. You chuckle, picturing a seal popping up like a soggy tour guide, winking at the ship. Was it a real strategy, or just desperate improvisation? Historians still argue whether these animal experiments were common or rare tales exaggerated by scolds. You lean closer, the crewmen's net smelling of fish and brine, and decide it's probably both, desperation mixed with a bit of hope. The Raven caws, as if reminding everyone who's boss, and you give it a mock salute. You shift on the deck, the barrel hard under you, and think back to the stormy start, the first Raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, the foggy gamble, the twig's scent, the ritual's chant, and the cage's craft. These rival methods show how much the Vikings leaned on ravens, their trust hard-earned through failed alternatives. You joke to yourself, if you were picking a navigator, you'd stick with the raven and tell the seals to stick to swimming. The air's crisp, scented with salt, pine, and the faint musk of the net, and you pull your cloak tighter, the wool damp but worn. The crew's rowing steadily now, their eyes on the horizon, the raven's twig feeling their pace. You're starting to wonder what happens when land's close. How does the raven signal it? You notice a sailor scanning the sky, his face tense, and your curiosity grows. For now, you let the sea's gentle slap and the net's soft rustle lull you deeper into this wave-rocked, raven-led world. You're still on the longship, the crewmen's tales of seals and gulls fading as you stretch your legs, the deck's damp wood creaking under your boots. The sea's calmer now, a soft shimmer under a sky clearing to pale blue, and the piney scent from that raven's tweak has the crew rowing with purpose. You lean over the railing, scanning the horizon, when a sailor shouts, pointing to a black speck circling in the distance, the raven, looping above what looks like faint, jagged cliffs. Your heart skips. Those are no clouds, but land's first outline, and the raven signaling it loud and clear. You grin, thinking, if this bird's leading us to shore, it's getting a Viking statue in its honor. Historians note that a raven circling while flying toward a specific point often meant land was close, its behavior a reliable cue for Vikings nearing a coast. The bird's likely spotted cliffs or trees, drawn by the promise of solid ground, and you watch it swoop, its wings catching the light. The crew's buzzing, adjusting the sail to follow its path, their faces lit with relief. You squint, just making out the cliff's gray edge, and feel the ship's rhythm shift, oars dipping faster. It's not just a bird now, it's a beacon, pulling you out of the sea's endless grip. You imagine explaining this to a modern pilot. Yeah, just follow the bird, no big deal. They'd lose it. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings believed a raven's circling dance was a thank you to Odin, like it was showing off for the gods. You chuckle, picturing the raven doing loops like a feathered stunt pilot, winking at the heavens. Is it divine gratitude, or just a bird stretching its wings? Historians still argue whether this was spiritual interpretation or just sailors reading instinct into every flap. You lean closer to the railing, the salt spray misting your face, and decide it's both, nature's signal with a dash of myth. The raven caws, sharp and proud, and you can't help but cheer under your breath. You glance back at the cage, now empty, and think of the stormy start, the first raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, the foggy gamble, the twig's scent, the ritual's chant, the cage's craft, and the rival animals. This circling raven ties it all together, a living compass pointing to safety. You joke to yourself, if you make it to land, you're naming your next Wi-Fi network Raven Signal 5G. The air's fresh, scented with salt, pine, and the faint tang of sweat from the rowing crew, and you pull your cloak tighter, the wool heavy but warm. The cliffs grow clearer, their edges sharpening, and the crew's chants rise, a low hum of hope. You're starting to wonder what happens if a storm hits now. Can the Raven still guide you? You notice a sailor eyeing the sky, his hand on an axe, and your curiosity stirs. For now, you let the sea's soft pulse and the Raven's distant chorus lull you deeper into this wave-tossed, land-promised world. You're still on the longship, the cliff's faint outline sharpening as the Raven's circling fades. Its job done for now. But the sky darkens fast, heavy clouds rolling in, and a gust whips the sail, snapping it like a warning. A storm's brewing, waves churning into white-capped beasts, and you grip the railing, your cloak soaked as rain pelts the deck. The crew scrambles, shouting over the wind, when you spot the Raven cage rocking wildly, the bird inside flapping in panic. You lunge forward, heart pounding, and help a sailor tie it down, your hands fumbling with wet ropes to save this feathered guide from the storm's wrath. You smirk, thinking, if we lose this bird, we are booking a one-way trip to Nowhereville. Historians confirm that protecting ravens during storms was critical for Vikings, as losing these birds could strand a crew far from land. Storms were common in the North Sea, and sailors took extra care to secure cages, sometimes shielding them with cloaks or spare sails. You wrestle the rope, the Raven's cause piercing the gale, and feel the crew's urgency. This bird's more than a tool, it's their hope. The sailor, his beard dripping, knots the cage to the mast, and you throw your cloak over it, the wool heavy but shielding. You imagine explaining this to a modern rescue team. Yeah, we saved a bird to save ourselves. They'd think you were mad. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings believed a raven caught in a storm could summon Thor's lightning to protect the ship. You chuckle, picturing the bird waving a tiny hammer, calling down thunder like a feathered superhero. Is it myth, or just a way to cope with fear? Historians still argue whether these beliefs were serious or morale-boosting tales spun in the chaos. You glance at the Raven, its eyes glinting through the cloak's folds, and decide it's both, hope dressed in feathers, defying the storm. The ship lurches, water slushing over your boots, but the cage holds, and you exhale, relief mixing with the rain. You stumble back to the railing, the crew battling ropes and oars, their faces grim but focused. You think back to the stormy start, the first Raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, the foggy gamble, the twig's scent, the ritual's chant, the cage's craft, the rival animals, and the circling clue. This rescue's another link, proof the Raven's worth every soaked second. This Raven a tiny sweater for its troubles. The air's wild, scented with salt, rain, and the faint musk of wet wood, and you pull your sudden cloak tighter, the chill biting deep. The crew's shouts blend with the storm's roar, a chaotic symphony that keeps you alert. You're starting to wonder what happens next. Will the Raven fly again, or is land close enough now? You spot the helmsman peering through the rain, his eyes on the horizon, and your curiosity surges. For now, you let the storm's rhythm and the Raven's muffled chorus lull you deeper into this wind-lashed, wave-tossed world. You're soaked to the bone, but there's a strange thrill in saving that bird, like you've earned your place on this crew. The deck's a slippery mess, and you brace against a barrel, watching the sailor check the cage again, his hands steady despite the ship's pitching. The Raven's calmer now, tucked under your cloak, and you feel a flicker of pride. You're not just a passenger, you're part of this. You think of modern life, where you'd be checking a weather app or calling for a tow. Here, it's you, the crew, and a bird against the sea's fury. You chuckle, imagining a Viking weatherman, scattered storms, high chance of Raven heroics. The storm's hell softens slightly, the rain easing to a drizzle, and you catch a glimpse of the cliffs again, closer now, their gray bulk a promise through the haze. The crew's still tense, but their movements are surer, oars dipping in sync. You realize this isn't just about the Raven, it's about trust, built through every flight, every ritual, every cage tied down. You joke to yourself, if you could bottle this crew's grit, you'd sell it as Viking storm juice and retire rich. The Raven's safe, the ship's holding, and you're starting to believe you'll see land soon. You lean back, the barrel's wood grounding you, and let the moment sink in, the sea's wild pulse slowing just enough to feel like hope. You're still on the longship, the storm's drizzle fading as the sea settles into a gentle roll, the cliffs now a solid gray promise on the horizon. Your cloak's drenched from shielding the Raven, but you're buzzing with the thrill of that rescue, the bird safe in its cage. The helmsman calls for the Raven's final flight, and you join a sailor at the mast, your hand steady as you unlatch the cage. The Raven hops out, shakes its damp feathers, and takes off, soaring toward the cliffs with a confident call. You watch it arrow forward, no circling this time, a black dot against the clearing sky, and feel the crew's hope surge, lands close. You smirk, thinking, if this bird's got a frequent flyer caught, it's wrecking up serious miles. Historians confirm that a Raven's final flight, often released when land was near, was a Viking's last check to confirm a course, ensuring they weren't chasing a mirage. The bird's straight path meant the shore was in reach, its instincts locking onto cliffs or forests. You lean over the railing, the wood slick but warm under your palms, and track the Raven as it shrinks to a speck, heading for the cliff's jagged edge. The crew adjusts the sail, their oars dipping faster, and you feel the ship surge, like it's chasing the bird's promise. You imagine explaining this to a modern navigator, just let a bird pick your GPS pin. They'd laugh, but you're sold on this feathered genius. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings believed the final flight carried the crew's prayers to Odin, like a winged post-it note to the gods. You chuckle, picturing the Raven dropping a memo in Valhalla's inbox. Please don't sink us, thanks. Is it just a story, or did it give the crew courage? Historians still argue whether this was spiritual ritual or a poetic spin on practical navigation. You glance at the sailor, his eyes fixed on the Raven, muttering softly, and decide it's both faith and focus, tied to those wings. The cliffs loom larger, their bases fringed with foam, and you're starting to taste the end of this journey. You settle against the mast, the empty cage beside you, and think back to the stormy start, the first Raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, the foggy gamble, the twig's scent, the ritual's chant, the cage's craft, the rival animals, the circling clue, and the storm's rescue. This final flight's the payoff, proof the Raven's earned its keep. You joke to yourself, if you hit land, you're baking this bird a fish pie and calling it a national hero. The air's fresh, scented with salt, pine, and the faint tang of wet ropes, and you pull your cloak tighter, the wool heavy but warming. The crew's chanting now, a low hum of triumph, their eyes on the cliffs. You're starting to wonder what happens when you reach shore. Will the Raven get a Viking parade? You notice a sailor grinning at the horizon, and your curiosity sparks. For now, you let the sea's soft sway and the Raven's distant call lull you deeper into this wave-rocked, land-bound world. You're still on the longship, the Raven's final flight a fading speck as the cliffs loom close, their rocky faces now sharp against a sky bruised with dusk. The sea's calm, waves lapping the hull, and you feel the ship glide toward a pebbled shore, where gulls wheel and cry. The crew erupts in cheers, fists raised, as the raven lands on a jagged outcrop, cawing like it's claiming the beach for itself. You join the shouts, your voice hoarse, standing at the prow as the ship grinds onto the shore, pebbles crunching under the keel. Land at last, thanks to that feathered guide, and you're grinning like you've won a Viking lottery. You smirk, thinking, if this raven's taking bows, it deserves a standing ovation. Historians note that reaching shore was a triumphant moment for Vikings, often marked by celebrations to honor their navigators, human and raven alike. The raven's success meant survival, trade, or new settlements, and crews gave thanks through shouts, feasts, or offerings. You leap onto the beach, your boots sinking into wet pebbles, and watch the crew haul ropes to secure the ship, their faces lit with relief. The raven hops along the rocks, pecking at seaweed, and you swear it looks smug. You imagine explaining this to a modern sailor. Yeah, a bird parked our boat. They'd choke on their coffee, but you're ready to build this raven a shrine. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings tossed bread or fish to ravens on landing, believing it ensured good fortune for the next voyage. You chuckle, picturing the raven waddling off with a loaf like a feathered pirate. Was it gratitude, or just a bribe for round two? Historians still argue whether this was a practical reward or a nod to Odin's watchful eyes. You grab a crest from a sailor's sack and toss it to the raven, who snatches it mid-air, and decide it's both thanks and a little insurance. The crew's laughter mixes with the surf's hiss, a joyful hum that grounds you. You wander the shore, the air sharp with salt and pine, and think back to the stormy start, the first raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, the foggy gamble, the twig's scent, the ritual's chant, the cage's craft, the rival animals, the circle and clo, the storm's rescue, and the final flight. This celebration's the climax, proof the ravens led you true. You joke to yourself, if you could throw this bird a party, you'd call it Raven Rave and serve fish on tap. The cliffs tower above, fringed with scrubby trees, and you pull your damp cloak tighter, the wool heavy but worn. The crew's unloading gear now, their chants rising, and you're starting to wonder what stories they'll tell about this journey. Will the raven be the hero? You spot a sailor carving a rune into a pebble, and your curiosity stirs. For now, you let the shore's soft rhythm and the raven's proud cause lull you deeper into this land way forgotten world. You're still on the pebbled shore, the longship secured and the crew's cheers fading into a contented hum as twilight settles, painting the cliffs in soft purples. You wander to a crackling fire, its warmth pushing back the evening chill, and sink onto a driftwood log, the scent of burning pine mingling with salt air. The crew gathers round, passing a horn of mate, and a grizzled sailor with a silver armring spins tales of raven-guided voyages, each story weaving the birds into Viking legend. You lean closer, the firelight dancing on your cloak, and listen, wrapped in the glow of their lore. You smirk, thinking, if ravens get this much hype, they need a Viking PR agent. Historians note that ravens were celebrated in Norse oral traditions, their navigation feats immortalized in sagas and fireside stories, cementing their role as divine helpers. These tales, passed down through scolds, blended fact and myth, turning ravens into symbols of survival and Odin's favor. You watch the sailor's hands trace a raven's flight in the air, his voice low and rhythmic, and feel the crew's pride in their winged guide. The raven itself perches nearby, pecking at a fish scrap, its black feathers glinting like it knows it's the star. You imagine telling this to a modern storyteller. Yeah, the bird's the hero, not the captain. They demand a movie deal. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings claimed ravens appeared in dreams before voyages, foretelling safe landings or stormy woes. You chuckle, picturing a raven popping into your sleep with a tiny scroll, "Turn left at the iceberg." Was it divine prophecy, or just sailors' minds churning? Historians still argue whether these dreams were spiritual omens or stress-fueled imagination. You sip the mate, its honeyed warmth spreading, and decide it's both hope and instinct, spun into stories by the fire. The sailor's tale ends, the crew murmuring approval, and you feel the journey's weight lift, replaced by this cozy calm. You think back to the stormy start, the first raven's flight, the Odin myths, the feeding scraps, the flight reading lesson, the foggy gamble, the twig's scent, the ritual's chant, the cage's craft, the rival animals, the circling clue, the storm's rescue, the final flight, and the shoreline triumph. These fireside tales tie it all together, making the raven more than a bird, it's a legend. You joke to yourself, if you could write a saga, you'd call it Raven, the winged MVP, and pitch it to scolds. The air's rich with smoke, made, and sea, and you pull your cloak tighter, the wool now dry and warm. The crew's voices soften, the fires crackle a steady pulse, and you're ready to drift, the shore's embrace complete. You're still by the fire, its embers glowing like tiny stars, the shore quiet now, just the sea's soft whisper and the raven's occasional croak. Your breath slows, matching the tide's gentle pull, each inhale drawing in pine and salt, each exhale easing the journey's last echoes. The cliffs loom dark, their edges blurred, as if guarding your rest. You sink deeper into the driftwood's curve, your cloak a warm cocoon, the fire's heat a tender hug. There's no storm here, no fog, just the shore's calm, holding you close, a promise of safety won. Feel the pebbles beneath, cool and smooth, grounding you as the firelight fades. The raven's perched nearby, a silent sentinel, its work done, wings folded like a book closed. Picture the longship sleeping, the crew dreaming, the sea rocking them gently. Every moment, the waves, the flights, the chants, melts into this fireside hush, where the world feels small, kind, yours. Your eyelids droop, the maid's warmth lingering, and the raven's soft call waves into the night, a lullaby older than time. You're safe here, cradled by the shore, the fire's last sparks drifting upward, joining the stars. The sea's been tamed, the raven's led true, and sleep's waiting, just a breath away. Let the tide carry you, its rhythm smoothing your thoughts into stillness. Close your eyes, feel the warmth, and drift into the dark, endless calm. You're part of the saga now, sailing on dreams with the raven's wings. Sleep well, Voyager.